Hi, everyone. My name is Casey Adler, creative director and co-curator of Teatron, a festival of Jewish theater. If you're not one of the artists, if you'd like to just take your camera off, and then we can bring you back on. We'll all schmooze at the end. Though we'd love to see everyone, we have a kind of a large round table of panelists tonight. We have quite a few people here today as well. Roger, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having
I love the
me.
lighting.
It's kind of dramatic, isn't it?
It's
But
very, yeah, you're shooting
I'll,
a
Looks like you're in a cave.
I am constantly in a cave, but it's great to come out of the cave for a second and join you in the world at large. But I will adjust my lighting because it's a
That's
little
okay. You keep it. No one said it was bad. It's
okay.
terrific.
Okay.
Um, all right, one moment. Adding a few people. Just added. Just a heads up for you, Roger. I'm sure we're gonna get a great comment and question from
Mm.
Joan. She worked with the Black Panthers and Huey P. Newton in the '70s, so you're gonna get a few good comments. I'm expecting that, Joan Chodorow. All right. Okay, so my name is Casey Adler. I'm a co-creative director and curator of a Teatron, Festival of Jewish Theater. Just introducing our panelists, we have David Chack, director of Imagining Heschel, Sidney Edwards, director of the African American Theater Program at University of Louisville, Chance Parker, playwright for Jim Crow, a choreo poem, not Francis LeBar, Colin Greer. He's got his wife's Zoom account on. Uh,
I'm just incognito this hour.
Excellent. You look like a Francis LeBar.
Yeah.
He's the playwright for Imagining Heschel, and we have Mr. Roger Guenveur Smith, playwright, actor for. I'm sorry, Joan Chodorow is coming on. I'm going to take you off real quick. Roger Guenveur Smith, writer and performer of Otto Frank. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope you watched those three incredible plays. This has been one of my favorite nights so far of the festival. Just to start it off, because we have so many panelists, I want to get straight to questions. Roger, so you've written and performed plays for Rodney King, Huey P. Newton, Frederick Douglass, now Otto Frank. Is there a through line specifically in the historical characters that you choose to portray? And what was it that specifically drew you to Otto Frank and Frank's father?
Um, First of all, thank you so much for your kind invitation to join you in this wonderful, important festival of work. Um, yes, I have pursued a variety of characters throughout a variety of histories throughout the last several decades of my work. Um, and oddly, what led me to Otto Frank was Rodney King, the gentleman who was the subject of another solo performance entitled Rodney King. And I was invited to Amsterdam to perform Rodney King at an international theater festival there. And it was there that I had the opportunity to go to the Anne Frank house. And I stood in that small room um, there and imagined Otto Frank having returned from the war, having lost his wife and two daughters in the Nazi death camps. And I thought that this might be something that could compel me to do a new piece, a new
Mm-hmm.
solo meditation for the stage. And here
Your
we are.
your language is so poetic and so evocative. Like that one line, Teutonic rage tempered by a bourgeois gentility.
Yeah.
It's like honey in the mouth. I would love for you to discuss, where do you begin specifically as a writer performer? Do you start with the words of that particular artist and then kind of morph into your artistic interpretation? What's your process?
It changes from character to character. For example, with a Huey P. Newton story, I dug into Huey archives
Mm-hmm.
for more than a year before I dared set foot on stage, particularly in the Bay Area that had such a recent memory of Huey in the mid 1990s,
Mm-hmm.
was murdered, of course, in 1989 in Oakland. With Rodney King, I did not want to dive in as deeply. I thought, in fact, that Rodney would be simply a meditation, a prayer, if you will, for a season of mourning in that summer of 2012 when we had lost him. But this thing called America continued to happen, and Rodney King continued to resonate. Now, both Huey and Rodney were both built through improvisation. However, um, Otto Frank is a scripted piece, and some of my pieces are scripted pieces. And it's very delicately scripted. There's a lot of influences there. In fact, the first line is "Ready to Die." And if any of you are hip hop fans, you know that that's a quotation from Biggie Smalls, Christopher Wallace, the great poet, whom Huey Newton actually quotes as well. So thank you for listening and and remarking.
Thank you. One more question before we move on to Colin / Francis. That one area towards the end of the play where you start counting the millions of Jews lost in the Holocaust, and then connect it to the Middle Passage, and then to Rwanda. I would love for you to comment on specifically making those particular choices of genocidal atrocities, and what that means in particular for solidarity movements, and anything else you'd like to remark on that.
Well, also in terms of, and thank you for listening to that, but also in terms of my work, even though it's historically fused, even though it's inspired by a long gone era, I never want people to leave the theater simply saying, wasn't it horrible what happened way back then?
Yeah.
And, you know, I say in Otto Frank that the barbed wire will continue to be, you know, propelled into a new century. And Otto, of course, is speaking beyond his daughter's time, and he's speaking beyond his own time. In fact, when a sitting US president would go to the Mexican border and say, wow, look at that barbed wire. There's nothing more beautiful than barbed wire when it's used properly.
Yep.
So that kind of, you know, brings this brutality full form into our present moment. So I always want the audience, and our collective theatrical experience to investigate, interrogate, and hopefully incriminate, you know, our present cultural moment.
Wonderful. Colin, I would love to start with just the title of your piece first. Of course, you wrote about Abraham Heschel, one of the great American Jews, over the last 100 years, who walked side by side with MLK during the civil rights movement. But what does it mean specifically, imagining Heschel?
Well, it means that I use Heschel to represent my fantasy about what was going on for him, and my use of him to imagine the world around him that he may not have been fully conscious of. But my sense of his sensibility is that were he shown more than he could have seen at that time, he would have been aroused and heartbroken.
We don't. I think of the American Jewish movement today, and I don't see a specific leader that we have that is as poignant and as important today that obviously was during the 60s. Why do we need to revisit Heschel, and how does his work connect to today's present moment? Do we need a specific leader, or is it more of a collaborative atmosphere without a kind of a hierarchy in powers?
Yeah, I think this connects a little bit back to what Roger was talking about, at least implying. Heschel didn't create a movement, he joined a movement. There was a social movement that was powerful, and he understood that Jews were implicated both in the call to action and also in the risk to life that if the civil rights movement had died, as we're seeing now, that the risk to life for all minorities, and Jews and blacks in particular, was heightened by that movement. The movement took the risk. It's a bit like the anti-apartheid movement, which at a distance was involved with some of the leadership. When we were divesting from South Africa, and this is a tangent, but I think it's relevant, the complaint was you're pulling out companies from South Africa that are actually providing economy for everybody in South Africa. You're producing more problems. And the word from the movement was, that's our choice, not yours. We're calling on you to divest. You don't have to judge the impact of that. If you join the movement, you join with that embrace. And I think Heschel was faced with a movement like that. He understood that he didn't try to direct it. He didn't try to add strategy to it. He tried to give his voice to what was being planned by others. But I think the important thing is it was a movement. It was being planned. And we live in a period now, and it's a bit like Roger's saying, that the era is not just Trump, it's really a 40-year history of the demise of the civil rights activism and the rise of right-wing activism. And the movement we're facing now is a right-wing movement. And it's barbaric and willing to go to great lengths. And sadly, the voices that we hear, sadly for me, the voices that we hear are not able to join movement on the progressive side, whether it be racial recognition, whether it be Jewish fear, whether it's gender rights. Those are unaffiliated voices that basically are met by the right, which is able to organize and challenge the voice with structural change. So we're seeing these state after state creating voting rights limits in relation to the racial recognition movement, using the fear of Black voices to actually solidify exclusion from political process. And they have the structure and the movement. And right now we have voices unattached to movement. And that's a huge missing piece. So for me, Heschel is a man in his moment that joined a movement. But it's a mistake to think that we need another voice. We need the movement organizational capacity, which means respecting people at the base. It means respecting the work that gets done at the base, not simply celebrating heroes, but understanding the work gets done on the ground. And the hero's voice is very, very important, but it is not the whole story. And so the character of Jonah in the play is really, I hope, a way of saying through the conversation with Heschel, you're not enough. You're just not enough. You can't do it on your own. Your voice is not sufficient. Your purpose in the world is wonderful, but it's not. It doesn't answer my pain. My pain can only be answered by my action, and that action either is going to be productive or not. And in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, we were fortunate to have people who could use their pain for productive purpose.
Was the character of Jonah based on any specific real life individual as well, or is that an amalgamation? Yeah,
it's an amalgamation. I have worked closely with activists in community-based organizations for a long time, from Panthers through current activists like Stacey Abrams, and there's an anger that gets either marshaled for productive purpose or becomes self-destructive. And I try to watch that happening. in relation to love between two men. Ultimately is the true story, that unless people can come together in that kind of bond, you can't have a journey of trust and discovery. And movements are a journey of trust and discovery. You switch tactics because you have strategy in common.
Gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Chance, I want to go to your short play, Jump Jim Crow, a choreo poem. And before getting into any deeper question, I would just briefly, for anyone who's unaware what a choreo poem is specifically, what is the historical, what is a choreo poem, and what is that technique in theater? Is it new? Is it old?
It is not new. It is something that's been around for many, many years. I was first introduced to a choreo poem from reading Ntozake Shange's play For Colored Girls Who Considered Suicide When the Rainbow's Enough. It is my very favorite play. It's the first play that I produced when I was doing theater and back when I used to perform in New York City. So a choreo poem is a combination of poetry and movement and theater. And that's essentially what it is. So with my piece, I really wanted to get all three in. We are restricted, we're in a restricted time. So, it was done on Zoom originally. I wasn't able to get as much movement into it as I would have liked. When I get it up on its feet, I'll be so excited to get it on a stage and really have some dance mixed in there, just some filling the space, really, really using the space. I think choreo poems are beautiful in that they're able to fill the space. So yeah, once we're back, in full mode and I'm able to get it up on a stage, I'll make sure that we get all the movement in there. But essentially with my piece, Jump Jim Crow, it was the poetry and the theater combined.
Excellent. I'd love for you to discuss why you chose to specifically place the BLM protester into solitary confinement, and can you talk to the current, there's a prison reform movement out on the grounds right now that is trying to push the president to outlaw solitary confinement as a means of torture. Can you speak to both of those?
Yes, so my idea to put her completely, okay, first of all, let me rewind just a little bit. This play was based on another play that I had begun writing, a full play that was based on the girls of the Leesburg Stockade. I don't know if you all know of these women, but in the 1960s, there was a protest where a group of teenage girls and boys, but they were sort of protesting separately, went to a movie theater because they're kids. And so they went to a movie theater in Georgia and decided to protest the fact that they were not able to sit on the ground with the white kids. They were made to sit up in the balcony. So they decided to protest this. And the girls and the boys were separated. The girls were thrown into the stockade. Their parents didn't know where they were. I believe they were in there for at least a month. And they were just in this one room. So all of these teenage girls together in this one square, you can't even call it a jail. You can't even call it a cell because it was just this like building that they put them in and they locked them inside. And then they were made to just, fend for themselves. They were fed very little. They had one bathroom that didn't really work well, one toilet for all of them, multiple teenage girls all together in this one place. So that was the original idea for this particular play. It came from that. And then I wanted to distill it down to one person for the means of getting this 10-minute short one-woman show going. I just wanted to distill the idea down to one. And then I wrote this piece during last year, right in the middle of the George Floyd protests that were happening. And I was just so angry that a movement that happened in the 1960s. I could take a play that was based in the 1960s and I could take bits and pieces of it and set it in 2020 and it would still completely work. That was insane to me. So, you know, that was that idea. And then I wanted to put her in solitary confinement because I think that solitary confinement is insane. And I personally have a family member who has been placed in solitary confinement, and he gave me a lot of interesting stories about what it did to his psyche and how he was, you know, just completely, he was just talking to himself, you know, and creating like these figments of his imagination and these things that they would do to him, um, making him chain himself up so that they could spray him with pepper spray for little to no reason. So that was all of that. And I thought that it would be interesting to do it with a woman, and then somebody who was simply stating what she felt and being arrested for it. So that was my idea. As far as the abolition of solitary confinement in the United States, I think that it needs to happen. I think that it is abuse. I think that it's torture. I think that a person cannot be placed solo for that long and expect them to come out well. It's not possible for them to come out well after they've been placed in a circumstance like that. I think that our country has a problem with, we don't try to heal the problem. We don't try to heal the issues. We will stick a Band-Aid on it, or we'll shove them away so that nobody can see it. You know, we punish, we're really good at punishment, but we don't do anything when it comes to getting people on their feet and trying to rehabilitate. And solitary confinement is really just making that way, way worse. So that's how I feel about that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Sidney, I noticed you, oh, I'm gonna come to you next anyways, but I also noticed you, before I get to my written question, nodding your head when Chance mentioned she was angry about that she could take a play about the 60s, basically change a few details, set it in 2020, and it still works. Can you discuss what your thoughts on that specifically, and then go into what, as the director of African American theater at University of Louisville, what exactly is African American theater? Is there a definition of it? Is there a way to distill it? And then, of course, I'm going to go to David and ask his similar thoughts on what is Jewish theater. Is there a way to even describe what that is?
Oh, okay. So yeah, when Chance said that, I was nodding my head because it's completely bizarre. It sucks, right? And it hurts that so much time has passed and seemingly not so much progress has happened when you look at very specific things, particularly, you know, what's happening with police and what's happening with prison reform, those kinds of things. So yeah, there are even plays that I've considered producing at the African American Theater Program where I was like, wow, it's still relevant. It's still relevant today. Particularly, I think it was Home by Sam Art Williams was one I was interested in doing. We're not doing that one, but it was still pretty relevant. As far as like what is African American theater, it's interesting that you asked that. I actually recently read this really cool article by the chair of theater over at UCLA. His name is Victor something. I cannot remember his name, but I thought the article was really cool. And he was basically saying that there was a difference between African American theater and Black theater. Mm. And that Black theater is what happens when we do it for us, by us, things that we create for our people, right? Versus he had said something about, it was semantics, right? But that African-American theater tended to happen with more of a white lens, as it were. It was more involved in that. It's a good article. I'll find it for you. But
someone find it and throw it in the chat.
There you go. African American theater and Black theater, for me, I use the terms interchangeably, is just art that we create for ourselves, by ourselves, about our experiences, not only in this country, but as part of the African diaspora. So at the African American Theater Program, we also are interested in doing plays that, yes, Victor Walker, okay. Thank you, Roger. Plays about African communities as well. And we did a play when I was in school that was about Yoruba folklore. We do different things like that. So yeah.
Great. I would love for you to comment on some of these pieces and just get your thoughts on them, from a short play from a new voice to longer pieces and their, to more established voices in the theatrical world.
Awesome. So yeah, I was familiar with Imagining Herschel. I was a part of a panel for that one in December.
Oh, lovely.
Yes, and I really, really enjoyed the performances in that one. Particularly Jason. I really enjoyed that young man's performance. I remember giving him super kudos for that. And just how important that piece was about a person that I was not familiar with prior to watching it. And for Jump Jim Crow, oh my goodness, I am in love with Chance's writing. And I wish so much that Kayla was on this panel. I would love to pick her brain about her performance in that and how she really dug deep. And what really struck me about a lot of the things she was saying in it is it felt very, the only way I can describe it is it felt very kitchen table. It felt like conversations that I have at my grandma's house with my aunties and my cousins that we wouldn't necessarily have in public, right? It felt very personal and very close and raw in that sense. I was like, oh, she said that. And I loved it. And I thought that the performance of that was just so real. It's for me. Because me and Kayla went to school together and I absolutely love her. And Baron Kelly was my professor as well. So I was just very, very happy to see them doing that kind of work. And I can't wait to see the bigger piece that you do, Chance. I'm ready for that. And then Roger, I was really struck by your piece. I was like, oh, okay. It took me a second to get into it. And I was like, okay, wait, I know this guy wasn't alive for that, and I thought how creative to take something that, again, wasn't so far in the past and connected to things that we're still familiar with, and how just heartfelt that was, even though it was imagined, right? I felt I was like, wait, what's the source material for this? It felt very real. I thought you were reading a book. I really thought you were reading a book that maybe he had written. I was like, wow, this is really great. And it lent me to think of some things I hadn't. I think the thing that struck me in that one the most was when he was talking about kind of like the commodification of Anne's legacy, right? The Hollywood, this that happened and the book that happened and how he might have felt about that. So those are the things that struck me about those pieces. I was really glad to see that this work was happening and that it's out there. And me and David talk a lot about the connection, right, between African American theater and African Americans and Jewish Alliance, and how, again, there are so many more commonalities we have than things that are apart, and we need to explore that and share that and cherish that.
Lovely, thank you. Before I get to David, I just want to mention to everyone, feel free to throw your questions into the chat, and we'll jump right. We'll address them after in a few minutes. David, similar question that I threw to Sidney. What our festival is called a Festival of Jewish Theater, but is there a way to even describe what Jewish theater is? Can you produce work about non-Jews and still have it be related to Jewish theater? Feel free to take the reins.
Yeah, well, I want to reflect on that in light of the play that we just showed. It not exactly the whole play, but a good piece of it in Imagining Heschel, and talk about Jewish theater through the lens of what I did as a director, and I think what Colin was also doing as a playwright, was that not only is the imagining of Heschel about trying to put ourselves in the place of Heschel at that time. It also goes to what Roger had said about going beyond our time and looking at the historical time, but that time then can be looked at from today with the memory of what's going on today. And that really describes Jewish theater and Jewish aesthetics, in a sense, is about memory. I had the honor and the privilege of working with Elie Wiesel, one of the great thinkers of our time. We're talking about leaders like Heschel. Elie Wiesel was one of them as well, and worked with him on my doctoral work and continued to be in touch with him and work with him on issues around hate, violence, and cultural identity, anti-Semitism, racism. And for him, it was all about memory. It was about how being Jewish is connecting to memories that go back to the beginning of our people, which also is a diasporic people. Once again, this Black Jewish allyship parallels in our peopleness, our peoplehood. And then about how we continue to both dip into those memories and those memories stay with us, and how we are as a people, how we reflect on the world, how the world is something that's always in conversation with itself. And also what you mentioned, Chance, about healing, about how then can we repair the world and bring the world together in a sense of what we say in Hebrew is tikkun olam, of healing the world. And I think that's so much of what Colin did in the play about Heschel, is to both challenge us and say, are we healing the world through these, in some sense, actually, Chance, when you did a choreo poem, Colin, I don't know if you were thinking about what you were doing as a choreo poem, but in some ways it is as well, with these kind of impressionistic scenes that, yes, they link together, but they also are standalone scenes. It's beautifully done. We have poets here in front of us with Roger and Colin and Chance creating these pieces for us. So thank you all so very, very much for the work that you did and that you're showing to our audience today at this festival. Thank you all.
Excellent. We have a very
Casey,
special
can I
guest
just-
for Sidney.
Casey,
Oh,
would you
sure,
mind
go
if
ahead.
I just wanted to add
Go
a
ahead.
one thought to David's, because David opened up important territory for all of us. I think it's Jewish theater, and I think theater with a historical conscience is part of that aesthetic. Memory is the core of our kind of place in the world, but also we're challenging the memory. We're not being, the goal is not to be locked into the memory, but to open it to new experience, discover from it. And I think that's a critical variable in this, that it's not memory to imprison us in the way the world was. It's to recognize that we still have the obligation to open it up and try to change it.
I want to connect that then to my next question, and then after this, we'll get to our special guest that just arrived. What you just mentioned, Colin, in terms of memory and challenging memory, I want to connect that to what in Roger's play at the end, he asks, can I ever forgive those who are responsible for your murder? What does that even mean? What does it mean to forgive individuals who commit unspeakable crimes? And how do we connect it to contemporary American society, where, if not the exact same kinds of atrocities are being committed, at least the temperament is certainly still there? And how do you forgive memories of crimes for people that you aren't specifically connected to, and connect memory to forgiveness? If Colin, you want to take that first, and then anyone can jump in.
Yeah, I just want to, let me just, two little sort of story points, and then I'll just say something quickly. So after Katrina, Mexican workers were brought in to rebuild. They were locked in at night. They weren't allowed out. They were put in sheds and they were locked in. On the Mexican border, about 3,000 people a year die failing to come across. Those are huge numbers. So the idea that our scale is different from what it was, is
Mhm.
something of a misnomer. We are destroying lives all the time at a very high scale. And I think it's important to know that our humanity still carries the barbarism with it. So I think it's important to just remember and know that we haven't reduced the scale significantly. And then just around this thing about forgiveness, I was very privileged and fortunate to get to spend a fair amount of time with Bishop Tutu, and the capacity for compassion that he has is something that comes out of his own personal growth. It's not an accident who he is. He's made himself into the compassionate person and leads with it. But again, like Heschel, he's part of a movement. He doesn't see himself as the leader of the movement, but he understands that his job is to bring compassion to it. That if you hate the exploiter, you are likely to become the exploiter.
Mm.
You have to really be able to engage in the healing. And in working with him it was not these are not his words, but mine, but I began to think that we should be exchanging intelligence quotients for redemptive quotients.
Mhm.
We have to learn how to have that be the highest level of intellect. And we have to be able to pursue redemption in ourselves and with others. But instead, we become very cerebral. And that leads us to trust analyses rather than lead with compassion.
Lovely. Roger, do you want to jump in there?
You know, those lines
Go ahead.
that you quoted, that I imagined Otto speaking to Anna,
Mhm.
were inspired by a colleague of mine by the name of Donald Lacey in the Bay Area. And you might have heard of him because this very courageous act was documented and shown on CNN. His daughter was tragically lost in a drive-by shooting when she was 16 years old. And he went to San Quentin to embrace the man who had murdered her, to forgive him, and
Wow.
to stand as testimony for this man's parole. And it was an extraordinary act. And he has, since his daughter's murder, organized the entire Oakland community into a movement called Love Life Oakland, Loeshe, which was his daughter's name, which means love life.
That's incredible.
So I imagine that Otto, you see, is talking to Anna beyond her time, of course, beyond his time, of course, and telling this story, this extraordinary story of Donald Lacey.
Mm.
And then they're in one quick moment watching CNN together, which is crazy, right? Otto and Anna Frank sitting up watching CNN. And Otto says to Anna, "Look at the killer. I think he's about to cry." And then Anna asks him, "Daddy, what's a drive-by?"
Mhm.
So the idea of loss,
Mm.
father-daughter loss, comes into our present moment in a very raw and real way. So then when he makes those impossible cries at the end of the piece, Anna, 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 it is not just for his daughter, it's for all the lost daughters throughout the ages.
I want to, Sidney, that was gorgeous. I'm pause for just watching Roger be amazing. Kayla, Sidney wanted to ask you a few questions, specifically about your performance from Jump Jim Crow. You're muted, Sidney.
Hey, Kayla.
Hey, Sydney, it's good to see you.
Good to see you. I think more than anything, I just wanted to say kudos. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I mean, I don't have to ask you about your connection to that piece, but for our listening guests, can you tell me like really um where did you dig from to really go to those places that you found in there? Like what were you thinking when you read this piece?
Hmm. I was connected to our present day reality of what is happening in society around us. Chance did a wonderful job of speaking to that. I know there's a Nina Simone quote that I love that says, it's an artist's responsibility, and I'm paraphrasing, to reflect the times. And I think that Jim Crow reflected the times, and I felt like it was a responsibility to share the truth of many experiences in one. And I know that one moment that I truly did connect with was my character's conversation about having a brother, because I have two. I have two younger brothers. And lately, just to be home with them and to speak about what we're seeing in the news and how they don't really want to talk about it, but having a platform to discuss that or shed light to how it truly hurts. Those were things that I was able to pull from in portraying the character. And of course, many conversations with Chance and guidance in that way, because I wanted to honor her words in the story. So that's it.
Bravo. Thank you very much, Kayla. Once again, everyone, questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. If you have anything specifically to either of the writers, performers, to David. David, you have a question. Go for it.
Yeah, well, it's not a question so much, but just how we, with Kayla here, and Kayla, so great to see you. And I also directed Kayla in the Green Book, so we have multiple overlapping connections here. And when we had the character of Jonah in Imagining Heschel, and we couldn't do the full production here live because of COVID, and we did the filming at the same time that we were filming Heschel. Jason, who was playing Jonah, was going downtown and protesting and being, totally appalled at what was going on because of the murder of Breonna Taylor. And this came into everything that we were doing with Heschel as well. And we were doing this in the midst of everything that was going on in the summer. So how could we not, in doing the Heschel piece, be aware of what you just said, Kayla, how the artist's responsibility is to reflect what's going on in society.
Colin, I actually have a go for your comment, and then I have a question to something you mentioned earlier, Colin.
Yeah, it's not a question, it really is a comment. I was just wanting to ask if we could think a little bit about this question of allyship.
Yes, that's what I was getting to next.
It's very present in the works, and and to watch us all on screen, it's a reminder that it's a very important concept and reality, and diminished in some sense by class differences, so that Jews, by and large, might feel that they are in a realm that's protected in a way they weren't protected before. That's a mistake, of course. This was a mistake back then. It's a mistake now. So the idea of solidarity between, which was once very, very real. The organizers in the civil rights movement, both Jewish and Black, were very, very close. And King's major speechwriter was a Jewish man who left because he had communist backgrounds and didn't want to contaminate the movement. But he had a hand in writing major speeches. That alliance was very, very close. now it's fractured some, both because of the complexity of Israel politics, the complexity of class politics, and the inequalities that, without doubt, African Americans suffer way more on the inequality scale than Jews do. Wasn't always the case. 40 years ago, 25% of Jews were impoverished. We don't remember that quite enough. But to change the trajectory of both peoples requires a solidarity between both peoples. And working at that and making that very much bringing that to our conscience, I think is very important. So I think the subtitle of Theatron, this allyship, is very, very significant.
You basically demolished question 5 that I had. So thank you for basically illustrating. I was going to ask what was the major fracture from the 60s up until today, but there is starting to be kind of a resurgence in the allyship from Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance, and there, of course, the Georgia Senators, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. But what specifically, maybe everyone can throw in anything that comes to mind, but what specific steps that can theater artists do to continue making those bonds? And I would like to also ask, because this is sometimes hurled around in liberal sectors, what does it mean to even be a good ally? Does that mean sitting back and listening and doing what you're basically told to do? Does it mean to add your voice? Does it mean starting a group? What does that entail? Sidney, if you want to start, or Roger, or David, or Chance. We'll start with Sidney. Or no one, Sidney. How about Roger?
No, allyship is commitment to humanity. And when we see a building on Collins Avenue in Miami split in half, and know that that building held the lives and dreams of many people, of many demographics, many of them Jewish, of course, as Miami has that great history. We must know that all of us are vulnerable at any given time to the vagaries of politics, yes, of course, to the vagaries of nature, and seemingly in Miami to the vagaries of architecture itself. When we are capable, I think, of recognizing our vulnerability and the vulnerability of the people with whom we share the planet, then and only then will we be capable of an allyship which means something and which can constructively change this planet. It has been demonstrated in this country in many ways and through many eras, but we know the vulnerability of that solidarity as well. Mm-hmm. And we know exactly how it has been and continues to be torn apart. And it is not simply cross-demographic, cross-racial solidarity which is torn apart. It is intra-racial, intra-denominational solidarity potential, mm-hmm. which is betrayed and which is infiltrated. And we've certainly seen that of late.
I love that.
Yes, what Roger said. Yes, thank you. That was beautiful and very similar to what I was thinking, which is, I think that we forget that we're stronger together, and allyship, that's the whole point of allyship. We have to realize that we have a lot more in common than we have that's different. And I think that Jewish people and Black people have been through very similar things. And the more that we realize that, the more we'll be able to come together and stand up against what is attempting so hard to tear us all apart. I think, like actually what Roger just said, I think that, I think back to what happened within the Black Panthers and what happened within the Nation of Islam, how they were able to infiltrate and just plant these seeds of hate within, and then that just broke it apart from the inside, and that was their way of dismantling the entire thing. We have to remember that, and then and not allow that to happen again, so that we stay strong. As long as we're together, we realize that we're the same, then we'll be all right.
Yes, Colin.
Yeah, I think those statements are really important. And you asked the question about what is the role of an ally, and I think there is no finite answer to that question. I think that, but the need not to be right, the need to share a vision, and to be able to allow yourself not to be heard at times, allow yourself to follow at times, as long as the vision is shared strongly. But it's a bit like a marriage. It's you need, there are times when silence is exactly the holy place to be, and there are times when an active representation of need is very important. But it's about moderating it, but always a shared purpose. The shared purpose is the partnership and the vision for which the partnership is the tool. And ideally, the partnership is the future. I mean, we want to create relationships that are the world we want to see. And that's one of the beautiful things in moments of the civil rights movement, that you actually could see the future we want in the present, in the way people related. King's friendship with Heschel was a glimpse of the future. Even King's friendship with Billy Graham was a glimpse of the future. I mean, Billy Graham tore down the rope that separated blacks and whites in one of his crusades in 1953 in Tuscaloosa, because he realized that it was wrong. And they became friends. That possibility and the endurance of those friendships was a critical message about the way the world can be.
David.
Yeah, and I see we have a question, of course, which is great. Thank you, people who are watching. Please put your, and not just watching, but hopefully participating. We'd love to have your questions. So the question is the potential of allyship hampered by the backlash against historically accurate education? And I think, that's a question that should always be there, that we always look to see what it is that we can unearth and excavate that is quote unquote historically accurate. That's also sometimes in the eyes of the beholder, not just sometimes, but often. And then the other thing around that, though, is that the stories that we tell, and I look at this as a theater maker, the stories that we tell need to be honored. And the honoring of those stories has to happen whether we agree with them or not, or think that they're not accurate or not, or think that they tell a story that's different from what we want to hear. This is, something that is so important, that we honor all the different stories that we have to tell. We place them side by side against each other. We figure out how we then can tell them with each other, maybe against each other, maybe in healing with each other, but the stories need to be told. We need to listen. We need to open up to the compassion that Colin mentioned earlier, and that compassion needs to be there. And then, we can also put it under the investigation of a historical lens as well, and see that so-called accuracy.
I'd like to also discuss what it means for Black Jewish allyship in liberal cities too. I think sometimes it's very easy and important, of course, to point our critical lens towards, right-wing politics in extreme states like that are, trying to stop voting rights. But when I look in Los Angeles, I see a very segregated community, especially that's segregated from very similar policies of redlining. How do we bring Black and Jewish youth together, and so that it's not just starting when it's adults, it's not just starting later in life, but when it's younger, in cities that are very comfortable with their liberal credentials?
I think that the arts is always a great way to go about that. We're so diverse in a creative community. All of my best friends have always been from multiple backgrounds, and that started from getting involved in theater. I think that's a great way to bring the youth in and to teach them about allyship at a really young age. Art.
We have a question from Calvin Schwartz. In imagining scene with Jonah driving Heschel to airport when he says to Heschel, "Knee to my neck," when was this play written? That phrase, alive today, and for women's equality movement, Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to quote that phrase from the 1800s. That's for Colin. Colin, did you get that?
Yeah, do you want to take that?
Well, just could you say the question again?
Sure. Calvin, if you could maybe slightly tweak the question. When was this play written? Specifically, he's discussing when Jonah is driving Heschel to the airport. Yeah. He says, "Knee to my neck." So I think he wants to know a little bit more about the history of that particular phrase in connection to when you wrote it.
Yeah. Well, that particular scene was written, what, David, 2.5, 3 years ago.
Right.
And it was not related to the 19th century cues to the phrase, nor the more recent ones. It really popped out of my head because it felt like that was the experience that was being described. So I can't claim any connection. It may have been living in me in some way because of those phrases, but I didn't in any way consciously articulate it that way.
Got it. We've been on for an hour. This has been an unbelievably incredible roundtable. I just want to do a last open call for questions from our participants. This has been, of all the roundtables we've had, I would say this is the strongest. Thank you so much for our artists. Again, last open call. Where's Joan? Where's Joan Chotterer? I'm unmuting you, Joan, because there you go. You have to ask your Huey P. Newton question, or just tell your story. Where are you, Joan? Where is she?
She's here.
Joan, I unmuted you. Where are you? All right, well.
Maybe she's not there.
Maybe she's not there. She is walking around. Anyways, right. All right, if there's no last questions or comments, then we are going to be saying adios. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, just before we run, I want to thank everybody for seeing the productions. I want everyone to put virtual hands together for all of our artists who are here with us right now, all of our playwrights, all of our performers. Thank you so very much.
Oh, we got Joan.
Everybody.
I am here. I'm sorry.
Joan, go.
I set in and I didn't realize.
I'm starting your video, Joan.
Oh, okay. This discussion has been amazing, and I, have a million thoughts about it. But just since you asked me to speak, I'll just say I saw Roger perform the Huey Newton play twice in Los Angeles, and what I thought, I loved it. And that's, as I went back again, but in some way pertinent to this conversation, what was so amazing was that I felt, and I'm not trying, maybe Roger, I'm wrong, but it was just that he was presenting a state of mind, instead of saying there was linear events, this happened, that happened. I mean, one of the things to me that was amazing to learn about Huey Newton, who was this amazing orator and writer and organizer, is that he did not learn to read until he went to prison. So this was somebody who, is that accurate, Roger?
That's pretty accurate, comrade.
So
I actually, when I finished high school, I was functional illiterate.
oh, you also?
No, I'm playing. I was literate when I graduated from high school. But thank you for being there, Joan, and thank you for listening, and thank you for remembering.
Well, it was extraordinary because you got the sense of, instead of like he did this, he did that, or in some literal way, the toll or the impact on him. He was a young man. He was a young man of being so engaged. And as I said to you yesterday, I did work for the Panthers when Bobby Seale was running for mayor of Oakland. And then I stayed working in the office I was working out of for another year or something with the different programs. And that same thing of seeing the story of Huey Newton, there was so many young people who were so galvanized. And what struck me also, just such amazing orators, engaging people when they'd send us out into the street to start doing something. But with this incredible vision, with this incredible zeal. And so in Roger's show, it was amazing because I was so struck by this experience with the Panthers, and then and Huey Newton was alive still then. So he would come by the office every once in a while, and he had this enormous aura. But Roger's performance was so impactful because you just felt you had this sort of inner life of somebody who is such an activist in a quite non-linear way, just this sort of visceral. And so, and I don't, is that,
You're great, Jen. That's perfect.
But I thank you all so much. This discussion was amazing. I haven't seen all the plays yet. I'm looking so forward. I did see Chance. I saw yours, and Kayla, who I guess is not here, in which I thought was amazing. Partly tangential to what I just said in a different way, but the context and I don't know what you would do staging, but in this video that the setting was so stark and so, and there was nothing in the set. So then you had again that experience, the richness of the experience of the person with this, very complex, committed, profound experience of what situation they're in and how crucial and how more than crucial, just I'm not very articulate, I'm sorry, just the depth of the necessity, the urgency, and the relentless, experience of a protracted history for, so many people. So thank you all. This was so inspiring, and thank you all so much. And I'm looking
Thank you,
forward.
Joan.
Yes, Colin,
one last thing, if I may.
Yes.
Just Joan's reminded me of it. I think I just wanted to remind myself and all of us that, we've been through, it's just thinking of American history from the civil rights movement to now. There was the Bernstein period where the Panthers were regarded as radical chic. And then there was the Alan Bloom moment where the effort to speak the truth became the closing of the American mind. And now there is the turning of the racial recognition moment into political correctness and the kind of anti-American stability and culture. And each time the truth is voiced, it is marginalized and ridiculed. And we have to be able to go through that, recognize that's to be expected, and continue to raise the voice. It's designed to close us down. Alan Bloom's Closing of the American Mind was actually a Goebbels kind of twist. He was complaining about the opening of the American mind. We're opening the mind, and we need to stick to it solidly, and allyship is critical in that.
Thank you. And if there's no more comments, thank you everyone. Once again, my name is Casey Adler. We are Teatron Festival of Jewish Theater. You can email us at teatronfestival@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments. Please join us tomorrow for some Jewish comedy, and the videos will be up till July 15th. Thank you once again to all of our participants. You guys are amazing, guys and gals, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, so-
Enjoy your evening. Shavua Tov.
A good week.